Greetings from God among us. Welcome to First United Church of Christ. We are located at 930 Marion Memorial Parkway here in Marion, Ohio. And we welcome all those that are watching us on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and all gathered here. Please visit and like us on Facebook at First UCC Marion. And if you have an emergency or need assistance, call the church office at area code 740-382-4537. At first, we practice an extravagant and radical hospitality. That no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Or another way of stating that is what I told you today. As we prepare to worship, I only have one announcement for us, and that is that the consistory leadership is requesting that no one sing today. Last Sunday, it was should have been announced, but was not. And you sang with quite robust vigor. But in these COVID days, we really should not. So we ask you not to sing, or if you sing hum, to just enjoy the music as a meditation. And then also the responses today for the forgiveness of sins, the offering and benediction, we ask that you read and not sing. Any other announcements that would be good for the Lord? And let us prepare ourselves for our worship. Carol, please. Great. All who are able, please rise and let us join responsibly in our call to worship. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you.
As God was with Moses and Joshua, so God is with us.
Come hither and hear the words of the Lord your God.
As God spoke to Moses and Joshua, so God speaks to us.
Hereby you shall know that the living God is among you.
In secret heart and parted waters, the living God was known.
So let us worship the God who is, who speaks, and still is known. Please be seated. We know how easy it is to do exactly the opposite of what we learned from our teacher Jesus. So let us draw near to our God, where in failures we will discover the grace and mercy that God has in store for us. So join me as we pray our prayer of confession in one voice, saying, God of the wilderness, like your ancient people,
We are led by your hand and spirit to stand at the brink of newness. Cross over, you beckon us, but we hesitate.
the
The way seems impossible. The waters are deep. We forget how many times you part them for us. We often do not go where you call us. We fail to trust your love and care. Forgive our lack of faith. Lead us to the edge of all we know, that we may step out. Help us realize the boundaries of your love. Extend beyond security and into the places you call us to go.
Our confession of fear and faithlessness has been heard, and God speaks grace filled words of challenge to us, as God once spoke to Joshua, saying, "This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know Moses, so I shall be with you." People of God, cross over into the newness that God brings. Praise be. Let us say together, "There's a wideness
In God's mercy, like the wideness of the sea. There is a kindness in God's justice, which is more than liberty. For the love of God is broader than the measure of man's law, and the heart of the eternal is most wonderfully kind."
Good morning.
Good morning.
So today is All Saints Sunday. And every year we remember those from the previous, that have passed during the previous year. So I want you to think back, looking out, most of you probably were in attendance for a All Saints Sunday, let's say 10 years ago. I'm going to say, even Ben, he would have been. Do you remember who we lifted up on that Sunday 10 years ago? Maybe not. Do you remember last year? And I think that as I'm looking out, I see a few people just kind of like, I can't even remember what I ate for lunch yesterday. But as we look at and think back, it depends on if it was someone close to us or not. And I want you to think about, do you remember 3 years ago? Do you remember where we were at 3 years ago? We were right here. 3 years ago, it was our first Sunday worshiping here in this space. First Sunday as a congregation that we were starting a new journey, as we were figuring out how we were going to continue to be the church in new ways. As we were navigating the space and trying to figure out how this was all going to work with 2 services. It's hard to believe that that's already been 3 years ago. I know to me it seems like it was certainly not 3 years ago. Time does fly. But as we think about the people that we remember on each of those days, we might not at this very moment remember who we lifted up, but there will be times as you are, I know yesterday it was a beautiful fall day, I was out working in the yard and starting to get nostalgic and starting to think about things, and then as I thought of one thing, then I would think of something else, and then I was thinking about how in the fall and how we were always so busy at church and all of the things that we would do with rally day and planning and starting a new program year and all kinds of things that this year maybe things are different. We just need to do them in a different way. But I also started thinking about some people that had influenced me and that are no longer here. And thinking about the people from our own church. Because I remember on that day 3 years ago, we were very intentional about lifting up some of the saints from the church in the past. Some of the people from our congregation that were strong leaders within our congregation. So as we think about that, and each one of us is going to have someone different. Because if I mention a name to you, you may not know that name. And as I think, we have gotten new members in the last several years, which is exciting that we have new members coming in and that they don't know the people that were here 20 years ago, 50 years ago. They don't know about your families, that some of you have been in this church ever since you were born. We have stories to share about the people that influenced us along our faith journey. And it's up to us to make sure that we do share those stories. So as we're looking ahead and thinking about 1 year from now, which is going to be here before we know it, as time seems to be going pretty quickly, think about how we can share those stories with others. We still, over the last 3 years, as we were moving into this space, as we were going through things in the other building, we talked about wanting to be able to share our stories and actually writing down our stories. That hasn't really happened to the degree that we wanted it to happen. So on this day, I would like to put that challenge out to us again, to write down some of those stories. And we're going to be intentional I know that it's not always easy to write that down. So in the coming months, we are going to be having a few of us contact people and just asking some of your experiences as we have moved from Prospect Street over to here, some of the things that have stuck in your mind from what we have done over there, some of the things that we as a new church, as we start looking at being church in a new way, what are the stories, though, that we want others to know? The new people that are joining our congregation. Who are the people that were important that we want them to remember? So as you go to bed at night, take a few minutes and think about that. Jot down some notes. And be ready for a phone call so that we can talk about who it was that was important on your faith journey and what saints from this church were a part of that. So, thank you.
Let us gather into the spirit of prayer. Lord, we come before you remembering the saints of the past. And we thank you for their lives, for the impact that they have had on us, individually and as a corporate body, the body of Christ. We, in the meantime, remember, Lord, those that are suffering, those from the hurricane and the storms that have hit our country once again, of the fires again out in the west, and of the tensions that are rising as the day of election draws nearer. And so we simply ask, O Lord, to be with each one. Help us to be the instrument of your peace, of your love, of your calmness. And may a spirit of health and wholeness encompass our country in this particular time, but going forward from this time as well. We lift up all the nations that continue to suffer from this COVID illness. And we ask, O Lord, that you speedily bring the vaccines available so that life may regain, renew once more in this world. We come now in one voice, O Lord, in the prayer that your Son, our Savior, has taught us. As we begin by saying, Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
We are fortunate that we believe in a God that is merciful, who is willing to listen to our prayers. And we are fortunate that we believe in a God that, through his loving action, gave us Jesus Christ to help us as we continue to live in this world full of sin and challenge. Let us give thanks to the Lord our God. God of the ages, we praise you for all your servants who have done justice, loved mercy, and walked humbly with you, and for all the apostles and martyrs and saints of every time and place who in life and death have witnessed to your truth and love. We praise you. For all those who answered your call to preach the good news of the gospel at home and abroad, and to administer your sacraments of grace and love, we praise you. For those who devoted their lives to teaching your word and sharing the inspiration of the Holy Scriptures with others, we praise you, O God. And for those who showed compassion to the least, feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, welcoming the stranger and offering mercy and forgiveness to those who have gone astray, we praise you. For those who are willing to lose their lives in service to others, caring for the sick, comforting the dying, visiting the lonely, consoling those in grief, we praise you. God, we especially honor the memory of those individuals of this congregation and those who are connected to us through Christ. Those who have lived among us and shared their faith in personal ways, who have finished the race and now reign on high with you. In particular, we lift up before you with gratitude and thanksgiving Janet Swisher, Janet was born December 27th, 1928, and passed on October 21st of last year. She served her church, Galilean Alliance Church, and her community through the Order of the Eastern Star, Rainbow Girls, and 4-H. Ruth Marie Haas. Ruth was born September 3rd, 1936, and passed on November 11th of last year. Ruth was Ethel Ellenwood's sister. She had a wonderful sense of humor. She made something joyful, even out of the worst of days. Thea Griffith. Leah was born July 5th, 1917, passed on January 12th of this year. In the midst of living to be 102, Leah maintained her independence and her reputation of being an excellent playmaker. Margaret Hazlett. Margaret was born October 21st, 1934, and passed on February 2nd this year. Margaret was remarkable, amazing, and involved, perhaps known for what she stated in her faith, is to believe with all your heart, dream with all your mind, and achieve with all your strength. She believed she could, and so she did. She was a nurse, a teacher, and a psychologist. Carl Ackerman. Carl was born March 12, 1921, and passed on May 8th. He was Carol Wall's father and was the last surviving member of the two crews that dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki. It took many years to come to grips with the consequences of what he had done, but came to believe that it was for a better cause, as peace came from it. Carl spent his life as an inventor, and builder, outdoors, gardening, and even putting up solar panels in the 1970s. Jenny Rigler. Jenny was born January 27th, 1921, and passed on this year, May 15th. She was an entrepreneur in the early 60s, a gardener, and a loving grandmother. Judy Thatcher. Judy was born August 1st, 1940, passed on May 19th of this year. She loved her family, and she loved singing. Jim Mace. Jim was born May 10th, 1931, passed on this year, July was Ann Shanda's grandfather, an Iowa farmer until the 1980s. He was active in his church in many leadership roles and also active with Habitat. Ruby Wallenbacher. Ruby was born August 21st, 1928, and passed on August 29th of this year. She was Laura Bell Wallenbacher's sister-in-law. And Ruby was always a joy to be around because of her joyful spirit. And now that she is missed here in heaven, she adds joy. Melba Huddleston. Melba was born August 6, 1927, and passed on this year on September 8th. She was friends with Patsy Kreider and Mary Brady. She loved books. As a result, she was the librarian at Central Christian Church. Allison Peacox. Allison was born June 6, 1953. Passed on this year, September 30th. She was dedicated, determined, and loved her family, and was an active worker in the Ohio Health Marion General Hospital. Marcy Carter. Marcy was born January 12, 1947, and passed on October 7th of this year. She was a high school Spanish teacher for Ann Shanda. She says that Marcy had a wonderful sense of how to pull the best out of her students. And they won. Penny Nagle. Penny was born March 23rd and passed on October 10th of this year. Penny was the wife of Roger, Eleanor Cole's brother, which Penny and Roger were high school sweethearts. And for Penny, in the latter years, she suffered from Alzheimer's. Loretta Argehauser. Loretta was born July 28, 1938, and passed on October 18th of this year. She was down to earth and focused on all her family, and was active in serving her community here in Marion. And so, Lord, we give you thanks for these and for all the saints who now reside in your kingdom. And in Christ we pray. For those of us that are young at heart, I have a bowl of water. You can't really see the water, so I'll lift it up and kind of flash it a little bit. Oh my gosh, it's cold. You guys have been sitting here way too long, but as we approach the scripture today of Joshua and God's instructions to the people of Israel to cross the Jordan River, the first instruction that God gave was that the priests, the 12 priests of Israel, were to step into the Jordan waters, and I imagine you're probably cold like this as well. But maybe we can remember summer days when we went to the swimming pool and stuck our toe in the water to see what the temperature was, and oftentimes we probably felt that it was way too cold to jump in, and there was some hesitation for us to do that. But ultimately, the priests stepped into the water, and the waters parted, and the people of Israel crossed the river on dry land, much in the same way that they did the Red Sea. And that tells us that God was with them, and God is with us, so that we can step into the cold water as well, and with courage tackle anything that may come before us. And so with faith in God, faith in Jesus, may we plunge into the waters and deal with the circumstances that we have been dealt. Talking about Joshua, he relayed God's instructions, and each of the 12 tribes sent a representative to help carry the Ark of the Covenant. These were the priests. And it is one way to point out that if we all share the burden, even a great load is manageable. If we all share the effort, great things can be demonstrated. And our individual gifts and offerings of ourselves may not be any great thing, but together we support ministry and service here and everywhere. So let us think of ways in which we can continue to work together as we listen to For All the Saints of Carol. Let us say together.
Give thee but thine own, whate'er the gift may be. All that we have is thine alone. A trust, O God, from thee.
And may we continue our prayer in unison.
Almighty God, we bring these tithes, gifts, and offerings as tokens of our gratitude in your presence, power, and lives. We bring them in the hope and expectation that you will keep them and multiply them. Use these offerings as part of our shared response to your call for us. Amen.
In the epistle reading from 1 Thessalonians 2, 9 through 13, we hear Paul writing confidently, if not smugly, of his ministry in Thessalonica and of the response of the people there. Let's listen as Paul rejoices. You remember us in those days, friends, working our fingers to the bone, up half the night, moonlighting, so you wouldn't have the burden of supporting us while we proclaimed God's message to you. You saw with your own eyes how discreet and courteous we were among you, with keen sensitivity to you as fellow believers. And God knows we weren't freeloaders. You experienced it all firsthand. With each of you, we were like a father with his child, holding your hand, whispering encouragement, showing you step by step how to live well before God, who called us into his own kingdom, into this delightful life. And now we look back on all this and thank God, and our teaching well of thanks. When you got the message of God we preached, you didn't pass it off as just one more human opinion, but you took it to heart as God's true word to you, which it is, God himself at work in you believers.
This week we move briefly into the book of Joshua. And in the Hebrew scriptures, this book is classed among the books of prophecy, reminding us that the focus of the book is religious, and that the Hebrew faith saw God at work in human activity, what we call history. In many ways, the book of Joshua is a continuation of the book of Deuteronomy. Moses' responsibilities are assumed by Joshua, a model of passing on responsibility to another generation. A similar tone and expectations color both books. In today's reading, we have a ritualized echo of the crossing of the Red Sea, as the representatives of the tribes and the priests with the Ark of the Covenant lead and make a way into the Promised Land. Nothing is said of people who live in the land. The challenges of conflict and settlement will come later, sounding almost parallel to what we find in today's news. We may even be reminded of the beginnings of the modern state of Israel in 1948, or settlers from Europe taking over North America. But let us listen to the account in Joshua and may God speak to us as I read from Joshua chapter 3, verses 7 and a little beyond 17. The Lord said to Joshua, "This day I will begin to exalt in you the sight of all Israel, so that they may know that I will be with you as I was with Moses. You are the one who shall command the priests who bear the Ark of the Covenant. When you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan." Joshua then said to the Israelites, "Draw near and hear the words of the Lord your God." Joshua said, "By this you shall know that among you is the living God, who without fail will drive out from before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. The Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth is going to pass before you into the Jordan. So now select 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And when the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the Ark of the Lord of all the earth, rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan flowing from above shall be cut off. They shall stand in a single heap. When the people set out from their tents to cross over the Jordan, the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant were in front of the people. Now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. So when those who bore the Ark had come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the Ark was dipped to the edge of the waters flowing from above stood still, rising up in a single heap, far off in Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, while those flowing toward the sea of Arabah, the Dead Sea, were wholly cut off. Then the people crossed over opposite Jericho, and while all Israel were crossing over on dry ground, the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan until the entire nation finished crossing over the Jordan. when the entire nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, select 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and command them to take 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priesthood stood, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you camp tonight. The word of the Lord coming through Joshua. We give praise and thanks. One of my favorite comic strips in the past was Calvin and Hobbes. Remember Calvin and Hobbes? You know, Calvin was the little boy, and Hobbes was his pet, his toy tiger. And so, in this particular strip that I lifted up, Calvin says to Hobbes, "You can step in the road tomorrow and wham! You get hit by a cement truck. That's why my motto is live for the moment." What's your motto? Hobbes answers, look down the road. Now, the Hebrew people had been looking down the road for 40 years. And it was certainly, I would imagine, a well-celebrated fact that they were finally crossing over the Jordan into the Promised Land. Now, I'm going to make a promise to you. You are not going to have to wander in the desert looking for a pastor for 40 years. The Promised Land will come in good time. Not in 40 months even, but in good time. Meaning God's time. So, as you prepare to cross over the Jordan, what are you facing? How can you cross over with confidence for the future that God has planned for you? How can we, as the church, face the 22nd century of Jordan? You heard last week, I hope, what Teresa Meadows had shared with you about the fact that there will be a letter coming, and it will be coming soon, and asking you for nominations for the transition team. And this is a crucial element to the search process. It begins the whole thing in which the transition team prepares you, the congregation, to enter into the search process. And in doing so, you are asked to nominate 4 individuals that you feel are spiritual leaders within this congregation, of those that have the sense of the pulse of not just the congregation as a whole, but as different groups within the congregation as well. And there's a few other criteria that has to be met for these 4 individuals. And then I will tally the results and contact. And the point that Teresa most emphasized to you is that when I contact you, whoever you may be, please prayerfully consider accepting the role that the congregation honors you with, because it is an honor. Now, like I said, we're not going to be wandering around for 40 years. But the people of Israel, not quite, they're Hebrew people. We're going to hit the story, I guess, by calling them Israel people. So the Hebrew people were ready to cross over into the Jordan. But there were some criteria that they had to follow. You know, they had to listen. And Joshua, when he comes to them, he doesn't tell them that they're going to build a great dam to hold back the waters of the Jordan, but rather he says, draw near and hear the words of the Lord. So they begin by listening as Joshua tells them to stand still and hear the word of God. And Joshua instructs the people to fall into formation behind God, not to march ahead of God, not to put the cart before the horse. But that this is demonstrated when the people set out from their tents and the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant are in the front of the people. And the Ark represents the presence of the power of the living God moving ahead of people. So listening is a key element. Now there was a wife that gave her husband the task of going to the market. She said, honey, we need to get a half a gallon of milk. And by the way, if they have eggs, get a dozen. So he came back with a dozen half gallons of milk. She said, what the heck? Why would you do that? He said, well, he told me that if they had a dozen eggs, get a dozen. And got you had milk. He listened. That's what Joshua is asking. That's what I'm asking. Listen to the voice of God. But with that listening, there has to come also understanding. The people understood as they came to the waters that the priests were to be the lead, that God was there, they were carrying the ark. They stepped into the water, and the waters parted and allowed them to cross over safely. And so we need to understand the process. And so step by step, God will take us hand by hand through the way to ultimately reach the promised land of a new master. But also that calls for moving forward and taking one step at a time, not rushing the process, but allowing the process to move in God's time, to allow any healing that may need to be done, to allow any education and elucidation, revealing that needs to be done amongst you, God's people, before the final step of calling pastor. So, we have to watch, listen, understand, and take our time. But now, let me say a word about the saints of the ones that we're celebrating, because we wouldn't be here if not for them and all the other saints that passed on before them, that brought us to this point. That they have been instrumental in our lives, and so we honor them. We celebrate their lives. And in doing so, we continue the story, much in the way that Amy had shared about the stories that have been crucial to us as a congregation. And that those stories need to be remembered and celebrated. And so as that exploration and reaching out occurs, we will incorporate that with the saints of old, the saints of recent times, of however that story takes shape and form. And the people of Israel, they remember. In fact, Joshua instructed them, remember that last portion that I read, in which each one was to gather a stone and place it in a circle. Well, a colleague of mine shared the fact that as he went to church every day, he passed a house that had a circle of stones in its front yard. And in the center of that stone was a fish, a symbol of a fish. And he and I, and I'm sure many of you are aware that the fish was an ancient symbol of Christianity. And so he surmises that as he passes by this house with the circle of stones and the fish in the center, that this is a reminder for people that live in the house of that property, that they are Christians and need to live accordingly. But also that it's a reminder for all that pass that recognize it as their sign of faith, that they also need to embrace, honor, and incorporate that into their lives as well. And so as we step into the future, whatever the future may lead and hold, may we have our circles of stones as meaning to what we as the people of Christ need to do. Christ's name. We stand now at the brink of the waiting world and are grateful that God's faithfulness empowers us to be faithful. So listen, God is calling us to step from worship into service. The water is at our feet and it's chilly and wide. The backs at our toes and beckons us forward in faithfulness. Part the waters, O God. Part the waters for we would cross over. So be it. He said, freely, freely,
you have received. Freely, freely give.
Go
Go in my name, and because you believe, others will know that I live.